keeps us on a narrow pathway of dependency and existence within widely ordained and accepted bounds. And it discourages so many people from going on a lifelong journey of self discovery, thinking for themselves, and blazing their own path.
David, how did you find carnivore?
Well, Dave, before getting into that, I just wanted to thank you for having me on. I'm a huge fan of you and your channel, and I've just learned so much from your guests, and it's almost kind of an addiction that I have, something I look forward to almost daily, in looking forward to what's who's your next guest and what they're going to talk about. And I found common ground with a lot of your guests. And but I don't like sitting around just on the couch listening to your interviews. So I like to find activity. So in a way, it's been motivating because I love listening, but I don't love listening while I'm stationary. So hopefully those that are listening to our conversation today will also find some healthy activities to do while they're listening, because there's not much to look at here if you look at me. So, to get into carnivore, I want to start with my mindset, and I give a lot of credit to a friend of mine named Luis. He had a direct influence on me deciding to give the carnivore way of eating a try. So, I want to give Luis a big shout out here. Tons of credit to him. And Luis and I knew each other for since I moved to the Bay Area. I moved back from to America from Taiwan in 2016 after 27 years abroad in Taiwan, to get remarried. And my new bride was living in the Bay Area. We both knew each other in New York, but she was living here for many years, and I joined her here. So California is completely new to me. And I met Luis through her, and Luis and I are really like-minded. And in 2020, when all of the nonsense that begins with a C, we're not allowed to talk about that much here, which I refer to as the malarkey. So if you hear the malarkey, you know that that's the code for the C word. And when that was starting, and before even the so-called lockdowns or house arrest began, Luis and I were in frequent contact, going back and forth about, like, what do you think about this? And, just saying, I think there's a power play at hand. This isn't really about health or anything like that. And we never fell for it, not for a second. I don't recall exactly, but when people around here were scared of the so-called virus and getting caught being out and about past curfew and all that kind of stuff, because we didn't know how strict they were going to be about keeping us locked in and everything. And so during that time, my wife and I went over for dinner with Luis and his family. This is like the first week since they locked us up. And we had lots of discussion, probably in the very first week of the house arrest period. Um, and he was the first one I ever knew to even question whether there was even a pathogen going around. And that's a position that I joined him in taking. And now I'm really solidly on the side of terrain theory. And this has a big impact on where I am today with carnivore, because really, to sum it up, it's just I have come to really trust the power of our bodies and not believe that we're in a zero sum game with pathogens, whether or not they exist and whether they're can be isolated or any of that kind of thing that you'll find in the people that are called so-called virus deniers and no virus camp. Um, that's what really gets me so excited about carnivore, is that I really trust just being able to nourish your body and let it do its work. So before I bore anyone with my background and go into how I got here, because it's an interesting journey, but I do want to touch on it. I want to list a few ways in which carnivore has benefited me. I've dropped 26 pounds in 90 days, 38 since last November. I stopped snoring, which is a huge deal when you're at friend's house or relatives and you're in the spare bedroom and you're keeping people up with your choo-choo train sounds. I couldn't sleep next to my wife for several years. I probably had sleep apnea as well, to tell you the truth, but I didn't want to get diagnosed with that for insurance reasons and all those other reasons. And I just didn't want to live with the diagnosis of something like that I thought I could resolve myself if I took accountability for it. I stopped biting my nails, which I've been doing since I was a teen. I'm sitting in class in high school and noticing that, wow, I'm biting my nails. I still drink coffee, but I don't have the jitters that cause me to bite my nails. So interesting there. I My gums don't bleed every time I floss my teeth or even used a water pick. My gums would bleed. Not hungry between meals, which is typical for people that are on the carnivore way of eating. And I find that there are changes in my personality. So I'm calmer and I'm more patient. I think I'm more optimistic in a way as well. And this is also huge because one thing that got me here to this point is that I had severe chronic back pain for many years. And it went away to an extent and kind of receded, but it was always present. And it kept me from, I basically used it as a crutch for many years. So my back pain is gone. That was like the last domino to fall for a while. And I have a steady supply of energy and I'm just more present in every from moment to moment. I also have a lot of fun looking through my old clothes, being able to pick out old t-shirts that were at the bottom of my drawers or nice dress shirts that my wife picked out for me when I first moved here and that are in my closet and I can fit them again. It's really cool. And I'm actually probably downsizing from the size that she picked out for me. So my entire mindset is more proactive. And I've been a procrastinator all my life. And I feel like carnivore is another example of me kind of like, oh, wow, why didn't I figure this out earlier? It's taken me so long, but I wish I found it sooner, but here I am. And I certainly wasn't really procrastinating once I seized on it. So I think another huge change is my mindset. And a lot of carnivores probably experience this and come to this realization that it's not for everybody, but if you can enjoy eating to live versus living to eat, then carnivore might be right for you. And I'm an all or nothing person. I'm either switched on or I'm switched off. And when I'm switched off, I find excuses to continue being switched off. But carnivore leaves me with no excuses. It simplifies everything. So these are really just the bullet points um, in what's been going on. And today is my 90-day carniversary. So I I know I specifically reached out to you to schedule today's conversation on my 90th day, my carniversary. So I have a lot to celebrate, and I've been through a lot actually. There's been some little kinks and bumps along the way, but it's overall, it's just fantastic. I really feel like everything's coming together right now. So essentially, I just touched on kind of taking the opposite from the mainstream and becoming a skeptic in a lot of ways. And I feel that that mindset really saved me from a lot of following along with a lot of the nonsense that happened over the last 4 years and kind of led me to this point as well and trusting my body. So I would say, led me to becoming a conspiracy realist in a way. And sometimes in my own videos on my channel, I'll wear a hat that says tinfoil just to get a rise out of people. Um, so that's part of that because I'm used to being called names, but it really comes from just discovering that a lot of the things, figuring out that a lot of the things that we're told are we're not being told the truth about almost everything, and we could just kind of invert pretty much everything, even such seemingly minor things as the benefits of exposure to sunlight. So I'll get into my athletic background, which is quite extensive, but to get to that point, I spent a lot of time training outdoors from the late 90s to mid 2010s. And at some point in the early 2000s, I stopped worrying about sun exposure. I stopped wearing sunscreen and I welcomed every opportunity to be out in the sun. And I noticed, being out training 20 to 30 hours a week for triathlon and running and even being in the open water and swimming, I noticed how good I felt when I was outdoors and active under the sun. And I even found myself describing myself to others as being solar powered. And I kind of took on that identity. Like, yeah, I don't wear a sunscreen. I don't need sunscreen. I enjoy getting tan. I might burn a little because I was still eating seed oils at the time. But I described myself as solar powered. And I took that, I really took that to heart and sought out exposure to the sun. So I haven't been afraid of that. And then I started questioning things like, well, then why do they tell us to put on sunscreen? And so that's like a minor thing that they either aren't truthful about or they're intentionally, steering us wrong. And so I started to trust my biology more than what the experts told me or wanted me to believe. I've always been intuitive, and things like that only help affirm my trust in my intuition. So on the flip side, we're indoctrinated to stay out of the sun, and slather on sunscreen, and wear sunglasses and wear sun hats and all that. And I always, all my colleagues in Taiwan or my fellow athletes, they'd wear like these big balaclavas over their faces and hide from the sun and wear sleeves to block sun exposure. And I found myself just seeking it out. So I'm used to kind of marching to a different drummer in that sense. And I really enjoyed what your recent guest Bernadette said. The Originally from Hungary, living in Australia, Bernadette was a fantastic guest, and she mentioned we outsource our thinking and our habits to various authorities, uh, and that would include like government, academia, industry, in the media. And I think it's clear that we do that to our detriment because it keeps us on the plantation, just following the norms in everything. And that can get us into trouble. And it can also keep us from really discovering our potential. It keeps us on a narrow pathway of dependency and existence within widely ordained and accepted bounds. And it discourages so many people from going on a lifelong journey of self discovery, thinking for themselves, and blazing their own path.
The really sad thing about that is we outsource our responsibility. We're always looking for someone to just give us the steps
Yeah.
to do something or the switch, the button to push to get the solution we want. And
Yep.
the sad thing about that is we're not just allowing people to control us, we're effectively saying to people, sure, I'll buy your products. Market the hell out of me. I don't
Yeah.
care. Just I'll spend as much money as it needs to just be comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always taken exception to the term consumer as well. Building on that, I just felt like something inside of me just that grates on me. Like, you're just a consumer. That's all you are. You're just a name and a number in a way. And I think one reason, like we, I think everybody shares this absolute hatred for people who harm children and abuse children, like people in jail that are in for abusing children or murdering, God forbid, children. They get they get killed in jail, and that to me is because there's something about the loss of human potential that just gets us at our, like, maybe like our our God receptor or something like that. It gets us, and that's I think that's the most disappointing thing, or the saddest thing about people is when they just don't even give their potential a chance or seek to fulfill that potential. So, in a roundabout way, that's thank you for that comment. So I found that, like, on a bigger scale, beyond sunscreen and being fed solutions and all that, like, it's pretty obvious we've been lied into series after series of wars and big events that we're told in the media probably aren't what they seem to be. And if you look into, the malarkey of 2020 and beyond, it goes beyond just a pathogen or health, things like that. So it's led me really to get motivated about taking accountability for my own life, because I know that no one's coming to save us. The system for sure is not saving us, and it's only going to serve itself. Like, like the U.S. government is the biggest employer in this country. I mean, in where I am, it's never going to get smaller. So I think one of your recent guests quoted Buckminster Fuller and said, if you want to defeat the system, you have to make a better system. So that's really where I am right now. I've stopped looking outside for saviors or solutions, and I'm looking to myself and those I can trust for a solution. So at least in at least ways of coping, if not really coming up with solutions, but solutions that don't involve, anesthetizing ourselves, tuning out or escaping, things like that. So if I can now, I would like to go into my dietary background. It's kind of interesting that, yeah, it's it's funny that the carnivore diet can be described as an elimination diet because I've been tinkering with my diet since I was a high school athlete in my early teens. And you could say that I've tried different elimination diets and a whole series of them. At first, when I was only, I believe, 13 years old, 14 maybe, I eliminated meat. And it was in a very naive, simplistic way. I wasn't into the ethical trappings or foundations, justifications for being a vegetarian, but I was reading Runner's World, and back then, it was like, let's do the carbo loading thing. So in a very simplistic way, I just thought I'm just going to fuel myself with simple carbs, and I avoided meat. I just eliminated the meat part of the equation, and I remained active through high school and early college, and eventually became a serious athlete later in life. And I continued on that path until 2003. So I was 36 at the time. I'm 57 now. And I just was looking into my training and the volume I was doing and how I was responding to the training. And I was just always a little bit maybe soft around the edges. I should have been really lean. My my um, muscle, whatever you call it, my power to weight ratio should have been a little higher for if, in terms of cycling, that sort of thing. So I finally just looked at my diet. I was like, well, I prefer not to sacrifice animals for my diet, but I think we're designed to eat meat and I'm going to give it a try. And I had trained a local restaurant to make all these different Chinese dishes for me uh, without meat, and they did a really good job. And I remember the first meal, just trying a beef dish. It was like braised beef on rice, classic Chinese dish. And the people at the restaurant were like, "Are you okay? Is something wrong? Do you really want to have this beef dish?" And I tried it. I said, "I'm just going to give it a try," just like I said I'm going to try carnivore a few months ago. And they made it, and it hit the spot. And I didn't even need to give myself a few days. I was like, okay, I'm back home. But what I had been in retrospect was a starchitarian because I was just substituting starches and tofu, things like that, for meat. And in Taiwan, that environment, that led to a lot of consumption of tofu. And I think so. What I did when I went and I reintroduced meat to my diet, what I was really doing was kind of pushing some of that starch out. And so immediately I got leaner and my performance became better. I was a very serious triathlete at the time. And within, I think, 2 months of reintroducing meat into my diet, I hit the podium. I made the podium for the first time. I finished third overall in a race. And that was it. And I tweaked my diet at other times. Um, and that included even doing fruitarian. And so it wasn't that I was fixated on the meat part, and I didn't really have an overall good view of diet. I think I was just looking for another way to eliminate what I saw coming down the pike, which was all the GMO in the world. And so I knew that the main cash crops that use GMO were like potatoes, tofu. So I had to eliminate tofu. That probably helped me right off the bat. And I believe that I even heard that the USDA was allowing cloned beef to hit the market, but I'm not sure about that. But that's what my recollection was. So I went on the elimination diet of just like What can I get locally fresh? And I ended up basically just blending everything in a Vitamix because it was so boring. I was just, and I did grow some of my own vegetables on my rooftop garden in Taipei. Anyway, so that was another elimination diet. Then I moved, and then that I just fell off the wagon on that. But I did find really good results on that. I was basically raw vegan without any, again, without the moral trappings, without identifying as I'm a raw vegan, I'm a vegan. Wait a second, and I'll tell you about my veganism. And I was at a point where I was kind of in the doldrums in my marathon training, and introducing that diet really helped me. But I think in retrospect, it was really because I was living in the subtropical climate of Taiwan, where you're basically just you're always trying to catch up to your hydration because you're sweating buckets every day. And for triathlon, you're training 2 or 3 times a day. So what benefited me from that diet, and I wasn't on it long enough to really develop any detrimental effects or notice any. I think it was really super hydration that helped me. And I actually, since you live in Japan, I went back in 2009 and ran the Tokyo Marathon after being on this fruitarian diet, and I had really, really encouraging results, even though my training was not as good as the previous year. So that was interesting. So I've been around the block quite a few times, and I've been a very serious athlete. I was training kind of like a pro, although living just maybe like a surfer bum would treat surfing. I was a triathlon bum in a way, and I kind of organized my life around that and freelancing. I quit my day job and I freelanced as a translator and copywriter in Taiwan, and using um, English. So translating from Chinese to English and doing writing for various Taiwanese companies that wanted to do marketing to the outside world in English. And while I was there, I resumed being active because I came from a high school background in sports and track and cross country. And prior to that, I was an ice hockey and baseball player. And at one point, just stopped growing. And instead of dishing it out, I got dished on. And that coincided with me discovering running. And I just took to that. And I really loved the way running felt when I was in the zone. And running really, well, endurance sports kind of got me going on this pursuit of that. Maybe it's runner's high, but it's also when you're not running, just being fit, that feeling of fitness when even an exhausting workout is energizing in a way. And the odd thing is that it's very elusive when you're training for sports, and you can find yourself just completely exhausted. You're probably running down your entire endocrine system. And a lot of times you crash, especially before a big race. You can find yourself tapering your volume just before a race, and your body goes, "Oh, you're letting me rest." And you get sick. And that happened to me several times. In fact, one time before Strongman Japan in 2000, I was supposed to do that race, which is almost an Ironman length, Ironman distance race. And so that elusive feeling of like electricity running through my body that I only got from sports previously, I'm now experiencing with this carnivore way of eating. So it's really interesting. I'm not getting that through activity, but I feel energized and I feel like I can take on any kind of activity. So I wanted to give credit to my dad a little bit. My dad is a geek. He's 90 years old, 90 and a half, and he was never given any opportunities to be active. His parents didn't encourage him. He grew up during the Depression. His parents never encouraged him to be involved in sports or took an interest in any of that, but he always encouraged me to take part in sports and activities. And he still, every opportunity he gets, he sings the praise of his college PE teacher who cultivated an interest in basic skills and lifelong sports and activities in his students. And this is the 1950s, like stereotypical Like go to any like period movie depicting 1950s workers, like engineers. My dad's an engineer. Those are like the poster boys for pocket protectors, right? They're a bunch of geeks who couldn't get it out of their own way, right out of central casting. And but this PE teacher really instilled this whole notion of lifelong activity in sports in my dad and his classmates. And he really carried that over to me. So he encouraged me, coming from a non-athletic family, to just play and be involved in any sport. And if I was good at it, he totally supported me. And he became my soccer mom, shuttling me to all my hockey games. There was no hockey team in my community. And so we had to drive quite a way for practice and games. And then when I got good, I even went to hockey school or summer camp in Canada. And but just in general, we were always just very active outside until the dinner bell rang. You know, we were out in the yard and everything. Quite a contrast to people these days with their PlayStations. And um, so I always had that support system, and my dad knew that playing around with sports and activities was good for me. And so I was a swimmer from the age of 9 on the swim team. I played baseball and hockey and started running as summer training somewhere like in early high school, just before high school, and fell in love with that feeling, like I said, that runner's high. And I wasn't really like one of those people full of teenage angst and didn't have to listen to the Smiths that much or anything like that. But I really took to the solitude and tranquility of running. And when I wanted to run with a friend or teammates, that was available. But the solo aspect really appealed to me. So I guess in a way, I've always been, I haven't been hesitant to go my own way in that sense. And that feeds into what I'm doing these days as well. So after college, again, I did go my own way. I moved to Taiwan where I first got active. After a couple of years, I was living in the big city of Taipei, it was, especially at the time, it was kind of polluted and very urban environment. And on the surface, you'd look at Taipei and go, wow, how do you exercise in the city? It's really come a long way since then. It was also only 2 years from martial law. Taiwan was under martial law for 40 years. So things were really changing at that time. And there was a 6-day work week. They had to work half day on Saturday, and that basically prevented anybody from going anywhere on the weekend because they only had Sunday available. And if they're going to travel somewhere, they could only go after work on Saturday. But then they instituted a 2-day weekend, which I think that half day on Saturday was probably unheard of around the world in the like late 80s. When I first arrived in Taiwan, that's how it was. So recreation really took off, and I just happened to be like on the ground floor when that was happening. And around 1992, Taiwan had its first triathlon, I believe, and I wasn't really aware of that. I was just swimming. So I was doing laps at a local pool and swimming and doing some yoga as well. And this is like pre-internet. I just was really fit without distractions, just through swimming and yoga. And I migrated from doing laps at a local pool to a swimming hole when somebody took me aside at the pool. He's like, "Hey, young man," back then I was young. And he said, "We don't swim at the pool. We swim at a creek." You know, those of us who are really into swimming. And it was like a swimming pool, a swimming hole where you could swim uninterrupted for about 220 meters, um, between one big boulder that would stick up from the water and then like a breakwater. There was a lock where a reservoir fed in. And I met some of Taiwan's pioneer triathletes there. And they would go there, and when there were typhoons, we'd even meet, and we'd dive in, and we we would ride the sluice of the water coming out of that reservoir, and then we'd jump ashore at about a mile downstream, and then we'd run our way back to the starting point on the road because there's nobody out in a typhoon, and the roads are wet and kind of easy on your bare feet and everything. So I got in with that crowd, and in college I had bought a bicycle, and I remember actually telling the person at the bike shop, I want a bike that would be appropriate for a triathlon. And this is like before they even had aero bars. So he sold me a bike, whatever bike. And he said, yeah, that's for triathlon. Cause any bike back then was for triathlon. And so I got in with these people and I saw a poster for that year's annual triathlon. And I was starting to get fit and I was starting to do some cycling with them and getting my butt kicked. And I set a goal to enter the next year's race. So that was the spring of 1998. And I signed up for that race and I got my butt kicked by my friends from the swimming hole because cycling was my weakness, and I even had to wheel my bike uphill a few times. Taiwan is super hilly; it's mountainous, but eventually, with a lot of hard work, cycling became my strength in triathlon, and I finished my first Olympic distance race in 1998. And back then, I was also getting involved in like triathlon forums online, but um, they weren't even graphic based at that time. They were list serve. So you subscribe to an email list and you'd make a post and everybody would get, were you ever involved in those? Or do you remember those?
Yeah, that feels like going back to the kind of bulletin board service
Yeah.
days.
Yep. And it was literally called BBS, I think, or something. So there was like a triathlon offshoot of a running board. And triathlon didn't even have its own board. And I became internet friendly with the people on that, and they were all raving about this Ironman in Canada in 1998, and we kind of like watched it live through text because some of the members were involved, and uh, so I had only done one triathlon because there was only one a year in Taiwan at the time, and the only way to enter Ironman Canada for the next year was to print out an entry form and send it in by mail. They didn't have online registration. So I was like, well, give me a year. I'll be ready for an Ironman, or maybe I won't be, but I'm going to try and see if I get in. And sure enough, I got a postcard a couple months later, like you're in, you're accepted to Ironman Canada 1999. So I did that and actually joined a whole bunch of people from that list serve. And we even made jerseys up and things like that. And my parents joined me, my ex-wife joined me, and I went on to complete 6 Ironman full distance races and countless shorter triathlons. And I also ran a bunch of marathons and ultra marathons, but I never really trained strictly for running performance over that time until I kind of retired from triathlon in 2013. I started out in ultra running. So, kind of like I said, my first few years as a triathlete, I was a meat avoider or starchitarian, always a little soft at the edges. And 2003, I reintroduced meat to my diet, and um, but I was always searching, and I just never really found the formula. And one thing that I did notice, and this kind of plays into what I was talking about, just being energized, was I loved that the feeling when I was really fit and I would pursue that kind of elusive feeling of being on top of the world physically. But at the same time, I knew at some level that fitness does not equal health. And I also kind of told myself, because I'm really intuitive, and I knew at some level one of these days I'm just going to stop pursuing endurance sports or cardio, as they say, and eventually just kind of slow down and maybe end up in qigong or tai chi, as they say. Um, and but another thing that I loved about triathlon was that it's almost impossible, if not inadvisable, to train all 3 disciplines each day. So triathlon training is about prioritizing, economizing, strengthening, and maintaining. So if you have a weakness, like I started out on the bike, really a weak cyclist, you work on your strengthening your weakness until it becomes a strength. But at the same time, you're trying to maintain in your other disciplines. And you're juggling your life commitments and you're trying to figure out your ability to recover, and it's just a really interesting puzzle. So it's a way to always maintain your engagement because you're tinkering with training schedules and training volume and load and all that. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Shane. Um, I just made it my last week's carnivore update. I dedicated to Shane, and I told a bunch of stories about Shane. He passed away on July 24th at the age of 56, and I'm totally shocked that he did. He was he never he was never fat his entire life. He was never overweight. I don't know what happened really, but he had an aneurysm and just he died suddenly and just passed away on the 24th. And his daughter notified me through Facebook Messenger. And yeah, I mentioned in the video, I think if Shane was the kind of person who just grabbed life by the balls, really, he just embraced every opportunity. He was the opposite of me. I'm a procrastinator, like I said. I have really broad interest. I'm interested in jazz music. I love art. I'm touchy feely. I love reading. I'm intuitive. And Shane was like, show me the data, mate. And he was disciplined and laser focused, and he was the greatest gift to my triathlon training. So we became really good friends and training partners. And training with him gave me someone to bounce ideas off and helped structure my training because we would kind of structure things together. And he kept me company. He was fantastic company, and he would kick my ass. So um, he was the greatest gift that ever happened to me. And one time in an interview in Taiwan, I actually called him like it didn't translate to Chinese, I think, but I said he was my greatest gift of, or he was my greatest piece of equipment or gear. Like, this is my training aid. His name is Shane. And that didn't really come across to whoever was interviewing me at the time. So one thing that's kind of interesting is that Shane and I, like I said, we kind of got in on the ground floor when there was a real recreational sports boom in Taiwan. And because we were foreigners and we stood out in the crowd and we spoke fluent Chinese, uh, we came to Chinese fluency through different paths. I had every single advantage to learn Chinese. I actually majored in East Asian studies in college, and I studied abroad in Beijing, and I went to an advanced studies program that led me to Taiwan. Shane was a machinist by trade who just had the travel bug, ended up in Taiwan and married the prettiest girl he could find and settled down. And he picked up Chinese really well too. And as native English speakers, we had access to all the triathlon publications. There was nothing online at the time, maybe some forums. And eventually there were internet forums and blogs. But we were really dedicated to trying to spread the word about triathlon and help develop the sport in Taiwan. And one thing that I did personally was I had the first website dedicated to triathlon in Chinese, probably worldwide, because the PRC really wasn't a place for triathlon at the time in the late 90s. And later I blogged in Chinese about triathlon, and Shane did some guest articles and things as well. So Shane and I were invited to give talks and clinics, like coaching clinics and lectures and demos and things like that in Chinese about triathlon. And that led to kind of a bit of additional notoriety. And eventually I was brought in to help coach the Chinese Taipei, they call it, but the Taiwanese national team. And that eventually, when I stopped doing that, in a way that led to my now career in photography, because I had all these connections and I took on private clients. I stopped coaching for the National Federation. I took on private triathlon clients. And then when they were racing, but I was no longer racing so much myself, I just went to the races to be in that environment and also be with the athletes that I was coaching. And so I started picking up a camera and taking pictures, and I got really into sports photography. And that eventually got me a job as a photojournalist. And the company I worked for was really generous and gave me their basement space so I could turn it into a studio. So I learned everything I could about studio photography, and that's really what my passion is people portraits, and athlete portraits is my favorite thing. So hence Portraits and Fitness, which is my handle on YouTube, and it's also the name of my podcast. And we can talk a little bit about that. So getting back to triathlon, I accomplished a lot in triathlon, but like I said, I felt kind of like it was elusive trying to find that energy. I felt spent and deflated from all the years of training. Like I was on an expiry date, and I don't know how people keep it up all their lives. I think they're probably just like accumulating oxidation in their body and wearing themselves out. And maybe that happened to Shane, and that's why he eventually expired, because I know he remained active. But um, and like I said, I never equated being healthy with being fit, or vice versa. Never, I was never under the illusion that a high level of triathlon specific fitness, you get really good at swimming, biking, and running, but that doesn't mean you can, you know, put a shelving unit together or go for a hike without really having to adapt to a different type of activity. And I made a comeback, so called, after a couple of years off of just pursuing photography, maybe drinking a little bit because my marriage wasn't too happy and I was kind of escaping it through drinking a little bit extra. And so I gained a lot of weight, but I made a comeback in 2013, had a really amazing half Ironman performance. And what I really did prove to myself was that I knew how to get fit if I just gave myself the chance. And because I had that aerobic engine, I knew how to train. I could get back in shape quickly. But I was really kind of done with multi-sports. And so I just wanted to simplify everything and kind of gain some time back in my life, listen to that jazz music that I collected so much of. And so I turned to just running only. And I did a few ultra marathons, and I really enjoyed that. And I trained, in fact, with a really amazing Kiwi athlete named Ruth Croft. Shout out to Ruth. She won the Western States 100 near me in California, I think 2 years ago. And on a record hot day, she almost broke the course record in her second 100 miler. And after she won, she said, "That's enough. I'm done with these 100 milers." So she's still a champion off road runner. Like she's done Ultra Mont Blanc and a whole bunch of others. But I had again, I just found a really fantastic training partner, and that was through Shane, who had met her previously. And so I was just cruising along, and at the age of 48, so 47, almost 48, in on New Year's Day 2015, my back just went out. I got sciatica. I felt like I had had a stroke because I couldn't get out of a car when we were at a rest stop. I was on a long distance car ride that day. Somebody else was driving. We got out to just stretch, and I couldn't even move my leg. And it was some kind of sciatica, but it started from my lower left back. And it I had just gone running that morning, and I felt like it was one of the greatest runs I'd ever had. It just felt fantastic. I was like romping through nature, jumping across streams, and it was just fabulous. I was on top of the world, and I was aiming uh, to schedule an attempt at breaking 3 hours for the marathon. And if I had been able to achieve that a couple of months after that back issue cropped up, I really feel that I was on track to being able to go for a sub 3 hour marathon in the early spring. And that would have been just exactly 30 years since I first went sub three, when I was a know nothing, just like a naive kid who thought I would always be fit. I was barely 18 years old, and I broke 3 hours in the marathon when I was just on my high school track and cross country training. And so that really threw a wrench into things. And while the issue got less acute, it was always there. And I would find myself just like, I'd get up from a chair and I'd always brace because I knew that pain and that stiffness would be there. And it was always just present. It wasn't so acute, but it was there. And after I got remarried and moved to the Bay, I was never able to get back off the ground with my training. And I think, like I said, I'm kind of like an on or off person. So mentally, I just switched off. I used it as a crutch or a way to excuse my laziness. And instead of throwing myself into other pursuits, like I'd throw myself into photography, I kind of just tuned out, I think, for a little while. And I was following a pretty standard diet. And I would say I believe, my wife and I believe that we were following, a decent diet, not really snacking or eating dessert more than once a week when we had company over. And sometimes I'd even skip dessert, but we just kept gaining weight, especially me. And so I found myself talking about my former life as an athlete. And I would uh, jokingly say, well, I was an athlete, and I might show a picture, in my favorites on my iPhone, I might show a picture of myself to somebody. And I'd say that was 50 pounds ago when I was an Ironman athlete or an ultra marathoner. And people would go, "That's really you?" And I really got tired of saying that because it was funny at first. And then, to quote the Smiths once more, that joke isn't funny anymore. That it just got there to the point where I was like, I got to do something about this. Otherwise, I'm going to be like Bruce Springsteen, glory days. It's just like I've got nothing to look forward to. And I'm just going to talk about being an active person in the past. So, in order to kind of kick my own butt and really surround myself with people who were active and kind of show me the way, and not make excuses, I developed this photography project, or the idea for a photography project. And as a photographer, I think a lot of us in photography, and maybe just people who are creative types, you, it really helps to, I guess there's an aphorism in photography, you work on personal projects and you do it so that you can work on the kind of things you want to be paid for. So you're not only, like, if you're not getting hired to do nature photography by a client, go out and do nature photography and show your work. Maybe a client will show up and they'll pay you for it. So similarly, like, I had a background in doing fitness portraits in Taiwan, and I wanted to get back to that, and I wanted to meet people, and I wanted to be involved with fit people. So I started uh, this project, and I called it the Fit Over 50 Portrait Project. And it was just before the malarkey of 2020. Uh, and I got a lot of interest, and I was in touch with a lot of potential subjects. But then the malarkey but then the malarkey intervened. And when I ended up renting a studio space in Berkeley in 2022, I revisited that idea for the project. And then, since I did have a set space for people to meet me for portraits, I thought, wait a minute, it would be really good to have a podcast to promote my work. And also, like, maybe I'll meet a CEO who's an athlete, and he'll hire me to take headshots of his staff. I'm thinking in terms of marketing and that sort of thing. But my real motivation, in order to what was really to hone my chops and motivate me to just stop making excuses. So I wanted to be surrounded by people who would rub off on me. And so I launched that project, and I just, but my first guest kind of just hit a home run with the very first interview, where he just said, like, I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing as in terms of my number of sets, or the weight I'm going to be doing, but I know that going to the gym will happen today, that sort of thing. It's no excuses. He's like, just as you know that when you don't have milk in the refrigerator and you need milk in the refrigerator, you're going to go shopping that day. You're going to go out and get milk. Or, like, if you have a cat, you're going to have to scoop the litter box, that day. And he's a tap dancer, by the way, my first guest. But he goes to the gym and he works out every single day. So found myself looking for solutions and saying, I'm tired of saying I used to be an athlete 50 pounds ago. And I, I was just motivated to really resolve my back issues. And so I started working with a chiropractor, and who has a really, I just really resonate with his approach. It's not probably a huge revelation to a lot of people, but it really resonated with me. He's like, I help you heal, you do the healing. I'm just here to facilitate that. And that's what I needed to hear at that time. So that was April of last year. And I started to take strengthening in my back and my core really to heart, and with regular visits to him to adjust me. And I really made a lot of I really made a lot of progress to the point where I was able to integrate strength training into my regimen. And that was last November. And by that time, I dropped about a dozen pounds. So I was on the way, but I was still kind of missing the last piece of the puzzle. And I did try keto at one point in 2019, so pre malarkey. And it was just kind of too complicated for me in a way. And I felt like I had too many cheats available to me. It's like people joke about communism, back in the day. It's like, what, we have too many choices. Like, why don't we have communism? There's just too many, it's too complicated to walk into a grocery store. Why can't we just have no choices? So to simplify things, I think that's one thing about carnivore that resonates with me as kind of an all or nothing kind of person. So I tried keto and it did work a number of years ago. And so that was in the back of my mind. But there was kind of that last puzzle piece remaining for me. And I did drop some weight, but I was still way heavier than where I wanted to be. And those last pieces, that last weight loss was not happening. I was making strength gains. My back was hurting less, but I was still missing something. And so carnivores really helped me accelerate everything, um, because it's just, I've been through some bumps in the road, but I've experienced the weight loss at the same time. I didn't lose any strength. I've actually only been back to the gym recently because I did experience some gastric blockage, I believe, that caused me some back pain. And then there was a bit of drop of energy, I think, as I became fat adapted. So only recently I feel just like that whole buzz, that it feels like I'm electrified on carnivore. Yeah.
And what?
Go ahead.
How did you first hear about carnivore? Was it just an extension of you knew it because you knew keto, or?
No, it's funny because getting back to Luis, and thank you for prompting me for that, because I needed to get back to how did I find carnivore eventually. Um, it was incremental from, so one thing I did that helped me a bit was I went to kind of OMAD, um, starting when I was introducing the strength training to my regimen. And that was helping a lot. I just felt lighter and I felt like my recovery is a little better. So I was kind of on that path. And then I was also, my wife found somebody on YouTube who is not really in the carnivore community. She's more involved on Instagram, but she's a model. She's a fashion model in New York City. And I think her name is Liz Seifert or Seibert. Apologies to Liz if I didn't get her name right. But my wife pointed out that she was like, she had really bad skin issues. She was, yeah, she had all sorts of digestive issues and really bad skin. So she needed a lot of makeup. She's beautiful and she was lean and everything, but she had issues. And so that kind of planted the seed. Like there's something called carnivore. And she lives in New York City, but she goes out into like Amish country in New Jersey, I think, probably rural New Jersey. Actually, not in New Jersey because they don't allow the sale of raw milk in New Jersey. So she finds raw milk, and she followed a carnivore diet, and that opened my eyes. But it was really just this past April, late April, that back to Luis, my like-minded friend and fellow skeptic about everything, Luis and his wife hosted us at his house. He's got a getaway house in a rural area of California. We spent the weekend with him, and that was one of those days where I was just terrified because they don't have walls in there. It's like a barn where they have this getaway house, and I was terrified of keeping everybody awake with my snoring. And apparently, Luis and his wife and his two boys, they sleep pretty soundly because they say they didn't hear me, but I suspect that I did snore like a freight train. But anyway, Luis was planting the seed because he at previous times when we got together, he's like, well, I'm basically carnivore, but I'll eat whatever we're eating. And I was like, carnivore, okay. And it's weird because I'm so inquisitive normally, but I didn't really ask him because it was just so far afield to me. Like, why would you be carnivore when you could just be keto? But then it finally just fell into place. So we spent the weekend with Luis and we pretty much followed his carnivore diet. And but we added a whole lot of spices to everything, like Mexican spice. And he was telling me about the benefits, like I don't snore anymore. Um, the energy level, not being hungry between meals. And he wasn't following it. And I still don't think he follows it very strictly. So, Luis, maybe you want to come aboard and be a strict carnivore. But that just really made the light bulb go on. And so we got home on Sunday from visiting with Luis and his family. And that Tuesday, I just started carnivore. So that was the first Tuesday of May of this year. Yeah. So that's really how I found it. And I just want to underscore that I'm the kind of person that I don't want to be dogmatic about things. I don't want my brand to be carnivore. I know that I've done a series of weekly updates about carnivore, but I think I'm ready, having hit my 90-day carniversary, to branch out. So there's other issues that I'm really interested in. Like I mentioned that I resonated with Bernadette's message the other day, not looking for outside solutions. And I think people who arrive at a skepticism of the system and what the world tries to do and pin us down. And when you think of yourself as awakened, that sort of thing, there's still a lot of traps that you can fall into. But really looking to yourself for solutions is the best way rather than like blaming them, them with the big, like with the capital T. I'm tired of that. I don't have any more time for that kind of stuff. And so I'm really all about solutions now. And carnivore has just worked out so well for me. I do have some tweaks, I think, to make, having arrived at the 90-day point where I want to reevaluate a few things. I'm probably under eating at the moment. I started tracking my food intake as best as MyFitnessPal can do, and it's kind of funny because MyFitnessPal warns you, unless you recalibrate it, it warns you about your saturated fat and things that carnivores probably poo poo, and cholesterol, things like that. But right now, at where I've arrived is pretty much pure, just meat and salt, and maybe occasionally a little bit of seasoning. And I allow myself a little bit of a cheat of cheese here and there, but I'm not snacking on things like cottage cheese. I'm no longer going out and buying raw milk, which I was doing before. When I first started on carnivore, I was having raw milk, which I'm thankful is available around here. But uh, I think I'm just really simplifying everything and I'm enjoying it. And most exciting for me recently is that I discovered beef brisket at Costco is cheaper than even ground beef or mince, as you might call it in the British world, the British speaking world. And it's $4.49 a pound locally, and ground beef is like $5.99 to $7.99 a pound. And so I just learned how to cook beef brisket, either slow cook it or slow bake it. And even my wife was like, "Oh, that is delicious." So I'm really looking forward to just all the brisket that I'm going to make, and I'll probably end up buying a smoker because that's really the way to make it. And I feel so energized. I'm back at the gym right now, and I'm making those strength gains again, but I do feel like my overall objective is just to be able, at the drop of the hat, to be spontaneous and to be able to just say, okay, let's go for a camping trip that involves hiking and backpacking, or let's go stand up paddleboarding, that kind of thing. I finally arrived at that point at which I've envisioned 20 some odd years ago, where I thought, well, maybe I'll end up in yoga and qigong, but I've arrived at that really overall activity phase where, and I think it's a lifelong thing. And that's what my father, bless his wisdom, and his PE teacher, they had in mind, just be able to do any kind of activity and be active, just be proactive in your life. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. So I'm going to reintroduce running and cycling, but my main interest is just all around fitness and being able to be spontaneous and go out and do anything I want. Yeah.
Nice. So is your wife doing this along with you?
Well, in a way, by default, she has to in, indulge and consume some of my carnivore food, but she's not completely on board. She does like to introduce what I'm doing because the results are, they speak for themselves. Yesterday, she had me, I showed up at a gathering a little later than she did. And so like everyone was already there. And I just walked in and people were like, what's going on with you? Like you've lost so much weight. And it's pretty remarkable. And I haven't been doing it for the weight loss, but if I were to pick a goal weight, and I think I'm only about, so thinking in kilos, because when I was an active Ironman athlete, I was racing at somewhere between 76 and 80 kilos. And I'm only about 5 kilos from being at my race weight now, maybe even, maybe even 3 or 4, uh, which is pretty remarkable. And all those years that I was training 20 or 30 hours a week and performing at a really high level in triathlon, I never had a six pack. I never had six pack abs. And like I said, I've been waylaid a little bit while I've been adapting to carnivore, and I haven't been going to the gym very regularly until just recently again. And I've resumed going. And again, I'm not sore like a lot of people experience, which is really interesting. Um, and I haven't been going to the gym, but I look in the mirror and I'm like, whoa, I can see I'm gonna get six pack abs, just from following a species appropriate diet. Just like a Rottweiler, a Rottweiler probably goes out and does its business outside, but it doesn't have to go running or it doesn't have to pump iron or anything like that. A Rottweiler is muscular, and apes are muscular, just doing what they do. So at some level, I think that's what we're meant to be. If we follow species appropriate diet, we're just gonna find that homeostasis, find that balance point where we're fit, and maybe we'll even have six pack abs.
So David, based on your experience with carnivore so far in these 3 months, if a friend came to you and said, "Look, I want to get started with carnivore," what would you recommend?
Well, I just mentioned I don't want to be dogmatic about anything. And so, for instance, there's carnivore influencers that say don't drink coffee. There's people who say don't use spices, or they caution you against dairy. I would say carnivore is an elimination diet first and foremost. So if you find yourself under some even loose definition of carnivore, if you're eliminating added sugars, if you're eliminating gluten, and of course those vegetables that are out to kill you, uh, or even eliminating and just staying on like keto style low carb vegetables, you're already ahead of the game. If you're cutting out dessert and you're cutting out alcohol, that's another thing that I did. I had a taste for alcohol and it's gone. And I'm sure that's really helped me. And if you've noticed, I have some rosacea. I think that's like that's one of the last dominoes to fall. And in trusting my body, I really feel like it's already improved a lot. It was really dry and flaky for a number of months, but now it's like it's clearing up on some level, and I think that's the last thing to fall. So my advice to somebody would be find your own level, really know yourself, what kind of person you are, your personality. Are you all or nothing like me? Or do you need to just dip your toe in the water to start? But just start and start with eliminating a few things that you can handle that won't make you really miss anything. Because if you're the kind of person who is like, well, I'm really missing this or that, you're going to get caught up in the what ifs. So I like this to just put all the what ifs aside and just go for it. So carnivore is really, really working for me, and I love it. And I love the community too.
Nice. So, David, how can people reach out to you?
Well, I do have a YouTube channel. I'm on Portraits in Fitness. I have a weekly update, and I kind of hinted at it. Almost over doing a weekly update on my health and talking about myself. And I want to start maybe interviewing other people. And Luis would be a good candidate. And just talking about solutions. Sovereignty is really important to me, personal sovereignty, everything that really, but it comes down to accountability. So the freer you are, the more accountable you should be to yourself. So I'm on Portraits in Fitness, and I have a website, portraitsinfitness.com. You can find my podcast there. And my podcast is also the galleries of the subjects that I photograph. So we do a studio portrait and then an action portrait session and sit down for an audio podcast. So I'm on Spotify and what used to be called iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and all the various platforms at Portraits in Fitness. And that's how to find me. So I look forward to everyone's comments, and I watch everybody else's videos that I can find time to view, especially yours.
Awesome. So I'll link to all those below.
Cool.
David, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much, Dave.